Last week I opened talking about an older television program called The Lone Ranger. And I have another one to talk about this week, one that I like actually more than The Lone Ranger. It's called The Twilight Zone. You may have seen it, you may not. I believe the Sci-Fi Channel still does a 24-hour marathon of it around New Year's Eve. But The Twilight Zone was an interesting program because it would take you outside of the normal, the humdrum, and even normal characters would experience things that were unusual. And most of my favorite episodes star an actor named Burgess Meredith. And there's an episode where Burgess Meredith is obsessed with reading. He loves reading. So much so that he's distracted at work because he's trying to read Charles Dickens. All he wants to do is read Charles Dickens. When he goes home, he just wants to read, but his wife wants to go out. His wife wants to go dancing. And to the extent that she's taking his books away, so he has to hide them under cushions of chairs and couch cushions to try to sneak a little bit of reading. And Burgess Meredith decides during his lunch hour, rather than be bothered so that he has time to read, he sneaks off into the bank vault. And since it's the Twilight Zone, that's when something bizarre happens. A nuclear apocalypse takes place. Atomic bombs fall all around the globe and wipe out civilization. But because he's in the bank vault, again, not necessarily accurate, but because he's in the bank vault, he's protected from the radiation. And he's still alive. And he emerges from the bank vault and realizes everyone else is gone. There's canned foods aplenty. But everybody is out of his way. And he goes to the local library and looks at all the books and says, "There's time now. I have time to read." And of course, it's the Twilight Zone, so there's a twist ending, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. I recommend that you view it. It's a tremendous episode. But the phrase he says right there is time now. What is it that you really want to do that you don't have the time for? What is it that you really want to do that you don't have time for? We already read these earlier from Daniel 5, that the writing on the wall. You've probably heard that phrase mentioning other things that are obvious and clear. The writing on the wall shows up, and we're about to read the translation of the first letter of the writing on the wall is numbered. God has kingdom. The writing on the wall starts by pointing out there will be an end. That no matter how much time we think we have, it will not be enough. And we'll never really be able to cry out, "There is time now." So long as we are in this life. And we, with the limited time we have, when we realize our days are numbered, we can have two responses. We can either want to party with the time we have, or we can realize our days are numbered and want to despair. Let's turn in Daniel 5 and finish the rest of this story. As we're calling in Daniel to interpret the writing. We're picking up in verse 13. Then Daniel was brought before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are to be found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make it known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, The Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house you have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know. But the God in whose hands is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. There ends that portion of God's word, and it is indeed a startling portion, indeed a troubling portion. When I was in high school, we started something at my high school called the Young Philosophers Club, where students were to gather together. I wasn't the founder, by the way, but I was asked to join. We got to gather together and talk about important topics, things that were going on, things that had happened, and how these things connected or didn't connect. And basically, we just sat around and talked about fancy stuff. And then when I was in college, myself and another group thought, wouldn't it be great if we could reinstitute the Young Philosophers Club in college? If we could bring that back. And we did. And we had some meetings. We met at one of the members' houses. We met, had some meetings, and we talked about stuff, talked about fancy stuff. And then at one of the meetings, one of the invited young philosophers brought a case of beer along. Brought a case of beer to the Young Philosophers Club, and that was a huge hit. And so the next time more beer was brought, and other types of drink were brought. And very quickly, the party changed from a philosophy party into a drinking party. And I distinctly remember the phrase that one person said as they lifted their ice-cold beer. They said, well, we're in college, might as well enjoy it. And that's our first point today. As we stare at this writing on the walls, we stare at the limited number of our days. First point is, our days are numbered, so let's party. That can be our first response. Nebuchadnezzar's descendant, his kingdom, here in verse 1, is great. And Belshazzar has inherited partial control of it. And what's he doing with that partial control? He's living it up. He's having a drinking party with 1,000 of his closest friends and his wives and his concubines. He's having a huge feast and a party. And in verse 2, he gives this command to bring in the temple loot gained by Nebuchadnezzar. And often in this story, Nebuchadnezzar is referred to as Belshazzar's father. But in fact, Nebuchadnezzar is not Belshazzar's father. Belshazzar is just a partial ruler. He's connected by family, but he's not actually his father. And in Aramaic, father can actually mean predecessor. So it's likely that people around him, including Belshazzar, are name-dropping Nebuchadnezzar. This guy who, as Daniel says, you know how great Nebuchadnezzar was, and you know that he honored God, but they're trying to connect to Belshazzar's trying to connect to Nebuchadnezzar's actions to name drop and make himself feel better, and everybody else is doing the same thing. And it's important that we notice that. I'm not just rattling on so we get to study Aramaic. It's important that we see that because a lot of the stuff we get to celebrate and enjoy is actually inherited. People have worked hard for things we enjoy right now. And we get stuff, whether it's money or cars or houses or a nation or even a planet. Other people have been here before us, and a lot of our success can be attributed to other people. And it's important that we notice that because even the inherited success has numbered days here. Even inherited success has numbered days. But Belshazzar doesn't care about all that. What's he say? He's having a great time at the festival. He's having a great time at the party. And what does he say? Verses 3 and 4. Bring in the golden vessels. The golden vessels that were taken from Israel's temple. And I want to use them at my party. This is basic sacrilege. We hear the word sacrilege maybe very little. It's sacrilegious. We don't use those phrases very often since the Middle Ages. But sacrilege is what is happening here. He's taking something sacred, something set apart for God, and he's making it secular. He's taking what is holy and turning it into what is ordinary. And he's doing it to shift the celebration of life. He's shifting the party. He's shifting the celebration from the Creator into a celebration of creation. From celebrating God to a celebration of the self. And this is an attitude we can fall into with really very little effort. We talk in our lives about faith being part of our life, instead of faith being the reason for life. We reduce religion into basically emotional support. You may be familiar with Jesse Ventura, the former pro wrestler and former governor of the state of Minnesota. And he's very famous for, with me at least, for one quote where he said, "Organized religion is a crutch for weak-minded people." So we let religion's main value be how it gives us comfort on the individual level. Often we hear phrases like, believe whatever you want, so long as it makes you happy. Believe whatever you want, so long as it gives you peace. Believe whatever you want, so long as it fulfills you. Let's see. When we make self-care our life goal, instead of celebrating God, our party isn't going to arrive at the end result that we want. Verse 5, what happens with Belshazzar? He's having a great party. He's shifted into a self-care, self-worship, creation worship event here. He's made religion, the golden vessels, he's made organized religion about making himself happy. That's what he's supposed to do, right? And what happens? This hand appears and starts writing on the wall. The hand appears, this writing on the wall, and that hand The visible sign of religion doesn't make Belshazzar feel better. It doesn't make him feel better at all. And it writes, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parson. Verses 26 through 28, we discover what those actually mean. Numbered, numbered. Numbered is repeated twice. Numbered, numbered, weighted, divided. Now these words are clearly in Aramaic. So when it says that Belshazzar and his wise people can't read them, that's unlikely. They can probably read Aramaic, but what they can't do is understand what's going on. They have no idea why a supernatural hand would be writing these 3 words. They also have no idea what the 3 words mean in relation to them and their party. They don't get it. They can't read or understand. They have this shocking reminder that there is more to existence than the here and now, more to existence than the party. And Bel doesn't feel better. Well, Belshazzar doesn't feel better. He wants to know what it means. So what does he do? In verse 7, he offers incredible treasure. Treasure to get answers. He says, here's something that bothers me, and I will pay someone, or I will buy something to make it go away. That sounds like me when I'm shopping on Amazon, but that's his response to his party. Verses 10 through 12, we see the queen come in. I don't know where she was at the party, but she comes into the banquet chamber, and she's used by God to remind about Daniel. Daniel, who served Nebuchadnezzar with, as she calls it, a spirit of the gods, a light of understanding. Now, Belshazzar, his name means Baal, protect the king. Their god Baal, protect the king. And we learn here again, we're reminded that Daniel isn't called Daniel in Babylon. He has a new Babylonian name, and that is Belteshazzar, which means wife of Baal, protect the king. Names that are built around serving another god. And if you do any research on Baal, you'll find that he wasn't the kind of God you'd want to worship. He was actually a god who required human sacrifices and other awful things, but if you would do those things, Baal promised to give you everything you want. And that's the reason Israel was so often distracted by worshiping Baal, because they wanted their party to continue. They wanted to get whatever they wanted. So the names, Belshazzar's name, Belteshazzar, these names are based, their whole empire, their whole country is built on self-service instead of serving God. And if you look around, that sounds an awful lot like the modern America we are building. An empire of taking care of ourselves. That's what's making Amazon all of its money. And what does Belshazzar do? He jumps for it. He jumps for the chance. This is just another click for him on Amazon. He's grasping any straw to make his world right again, to get his party started again, to get back to the party. I had to quit the party, actually. I had to stop going to my own Young Philosophers Club because it was nothing like Young Philosophers Club. It shifted from a philosopher's party to being a philosopher's party with alcohol to then just being a party about alcohol. And I don't know about you, but watching people drink for the sake of drinking is a pretty hollow party. People were just there for the drinking, and that got depressing. It got depressing over time. And that's possible for most of us. Most of us, if we see enough disappointment, we can feel like just giving up. And that's our second point today. Your days are numbered, so let's despair. Your days are numbered, let's give up. When the writing appears, what happens to Belshazzar? We already heard that his party quits. How does it stop? What happens? Verse 6. he is terrified. We get this language, his color changes. His limbs give way. He looks into the fact that his party isn't the end of everything. Glimpses that there will be an end to his life. And in Hebrew, we get the phrase, it's not his limbs give way, it's that his joints are loosened. He actually can't hold himself up anymore. And his party stops. Verse 8, he tries to buy his way out of it, and his smart guys let him down. His smart guys fail, and his color changes again. Oh my goodness, my party stopped. I'm terrified. I can't buy my way out of this. I'm more terrified. I can't shop for something that's going to make my life meaningful. I'm terrified. Are you at this point? Have you looked into your limited future and realized you can't hold yourself up? Have you stopped partying and realized that you by yourself aren't worth much celebrating? Verses 24 through 28, Daniel points out that there is someone else worth celebrating. He says, from his hand this writing was sent. And he explains the writing. Mene, mene, means numbered, numbered. Your kingdom, your life, your party, the days are numbered, limited. Then we get tekel, which means weighed. Weighed and found wanting. Weighed, Belshazzar, and you aren't as great as you think you are. There's a film that came out recently, and if it's your favorite movie, if you really enjoy it, if you wept tears of joy, I'm not saying anything against the film, I'm just talking about the plot. The name of the movie is called A Dog's Purpose. That's the name of the film. And the movie's about a dog. Maybe some of you have seen it, and correct me afterwards if I'm wrong, but what I got from it was that it's about a dog that is reincarnated, I think 4 times, as different dogs to learn the purpose of a dog's existence. And after the 4 reincarnations and all the lives that dog had touched, the dog learns that its purpose was to love people and to make them happy. That's the dog's purpose. So when I tell you that you have no worth celebrating, when I tell you you aren't worth worshiping, you may be responding and say, wait a minute. What about my basic value as a living being? What about my dignity and value as a human? What about the basic value of life? I can say I have value because I love people. I can say I have value because I help people. I can say I have value because I make people happy. But we get this word weighed here. Is Belshazzar making people happy? At least 1,000 that got invited to his party. But he's been weighed, and he's been found wanting. Unless you do those things, love people, help people, and make them happy perfectly, your actions have no eternal significance. They've been weighed and found wanting. All the partying, all the emotional support, all the buying, the selling, the self-care, all the helping others mean nothing. And that's a hard lesson to get, but it's one we have to get. We are not worth worshiping. You or me, or Babylonian kings or queens or wise men or even Daniel, none of us have enough value on our own. But it gets worse than that even, because we get another word. Beyond weighed, we get the number person, which means divided. Verse 30, how does this party end for Belshazzar? His kingdom ends along with his life. That very night he dies. And Babylon, this great, incredible, most powerful empire on the face of the earth at that time, that he'd inherited from the hard work of Nebuchadnezzar and the incredible sovereignty of God, his kingdom gets divided amongst the Medes and the Persians. All the partying, all the emotional support, the buying, the selling, the self-care, and even the helping others benefit us none when we are dead. Because we don't get for dog's purpose chances. We don't get for reincarnated tries. God's word right here says reincarnation is not an option. Days are numbered. One life, one chance. And when we're gone, our assets are divided up amongst little smaller empires. Our stuff goes to other people. And even our memory, when those people forget where the stuff came from, our memory fades away in the sands of time. And that is a reason to despair. And if that's all we get from this portion of God's Word, we're going to be miserable, because that is a reason to despair. We can say, our days are numbered, so let's despair. Is there any way to find purpose? Is there any way to find value beyond our limited days? Is there any way to be weighed and not found wanting? Is there a way? Verse 17, how does Daniel answer the Amazon shopping? He says, let your gifts be for someone else. He doesn't want stuff. He knows he's not worthy of worship by himself. Let's reread verses 18 through 23. O King, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness, and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he killed, and whom he would he kept alive. Whom he would he raised up, and whom he would he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of an ox, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind, and sets it over whom he will. And you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. But you have lifted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not hear or know. But the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. God is the one who gives kingdoms, wealth, and influence. God is the one who has value. Belshazzar brings in the sacred objects, the things, by sacred I mean set apart for God, and he uses them to worship gods of gold and all these other elements. He worshiped creation instead of the Creator. And we're tempted to do the same thing every single day. We celebrate money, we celebrate comfort, we celebrate possessions, we celebrate youth, we celebrate beauty. But those things cannot give you value because they keep running out. And that's why we feel like despairing when this party inevitably ends. Daniel's able to see beyond the stuff, beyond the party. How? One phrase you need, and we need if we're going to defeat despair today. This phrase right here, humble heart. Belshazzar does not have one. He has lifted himself up against the Lord of heaven, we get here. Even when he's reminded of his own mortality, even when he's got the words explained, what's his response? Not one of humility. He's told his kingdom is over, and what does he do? Reward Daniel by making him third in the dead kingdom. Who cares? Kingdom's done. I don't want this reward. It's not a reward at all. It's worthless. I don't want your gold chain. The Medes and Persians are going to take it away. None of this matters, but he goes back to his old familiar behavior of worshiping himself, worshiping creation. He goes back to shopping on Amazon to solve his problems. Hear Daniel's words telling you that that is hopeless. God, in whose hand, Daniel says, is your breath, realize only God has power over life and death. Only God has total authority, and therefore he's the only one worth celebrating. But how does this keep us from despair? How is humbling ourselves going to help? I feel sad when I'm humble. How is this going to help? How is being reminded that I'm not so great going to help me not despair? God is worth worshiping, remember. So for us to be weighed and not found wanting, we're going to need God to share his value. And fortunately, that's just what God does. Fortunately, God shares his value. He explained it more clearly than writing on the wall. And we use that phrase, I see the writing on the wall. More clearly than writing on the wall. God explained to us how we can have value. Jesus, the Son of God, took on the form of a man and stood right in front of us. And he then willingly died to take the blame you deserve for distracting yourself with the party. The blame you deserve for celebrating yourself, for worshiping created things instead of the Creator. To have value, you need to trust Jesus. And you are numbered then as worthy of days without end. Worthy of an eternal life with Jesus Christ. Humble your heart today and ask Jesus to be what you worship only. Don't despair. Don't just go back to the party. Be weighed in Christ and you will never be found wanting.